thinking that one of the big things that this exhibition is trying to show, or it shows indirectly or whatever, is that because climate change is a massive thing that completely disturbs all your conceptions of life and how you should live, you know, it's a big existential crisis that completely opens up what it is that you're supposed to do. And one of the problems with climate change is that it's really hard to symbolize to yourself, to represent to yourself. How do you represent what could be the end of your way of life? And one of the great things about things like this is that people are trying to symbolize the world and the way that it changes. And if they do that successfully, then that would enable you as people and all of us to actually be able to live more comfortably with the sense of impending amazing change. And I think that's what's really important about the bringing art and science together, is that sense that we can actually get an accurate symbolization of change so that we can live forcefully and politically, obviously. Thank you.
I might just, before I go to Andy, I might just bring my perspective on this is, those photographs on the wall over there are mine. And in listening to the conversations and thinking about it, I almost have a dual perspective on the value of those sorts of artworks. I like to think they're artworks. With something that's so serious and threatening as climate change, that sometimes I feel those sort of works almost not quite trivialised, but they're pretty photos and they're beautiful. However, we're talking about something really serious here, which is climate change and the potential future of humanity. And what I'm often reminded when I think about this and in this way is, I don't know if anyone knows the work of Ansel Adams, a very famous landscape photographer, beautiful black and white landscape photography in America. And in the outbreak of both the First World War and the Second World War, he was heavily criticised for continuing to go and photograph these beautiful landscapes. All these people in Europe were dying and suffering, but he refused. He just said, I want to do my landscape photography. It has a place. I'm not out to document all the misery and suffering of the world. That's someone else's role in the arts. So whenever I think about the sort of stuff that I like to do, I'm still torn between those two dichotomies of either depicting something beautiful or something that should be really, really important. Okay, after that little speech, I'll move on to Andy. Andy is a practicing scientist, research scientist, academic, and an artist. Andy, can you tell us something about the way you approach both your science and your teaching and your art, and whether there is something that unifies all three aspects of your life?
Yeah, I came to science after I came to art. I didn't do any science at all until I was 30, and I didn't think that I could, and I thought it was dry and boring, except that I'd had one experience in a class that I sort of dropped out of in high school, where it was biology, and I loved parts of that because that was where I got to draw things in great detail. I drew a sheep's brain, and I was given 100% for it or something, and then I just dropped out because it got too hard. But really, my art is an emotional sort of response to things that I find breathtaking or beautiful. And I got into science because I just loved the natural world so much that the only way I could get closer to it was by being educated in science and working in the natural world, to try and discover it more closely. So when I became a scientist, I didn't really think anything of seeing the beauty in what I did as a scientist at a personal level. But as a professional level, I had a real almost sense of guilt, because we're supposed to be objective as scientists. And if I fell in love with something, my artwork is over there. I have one picture of a tree on one side, and on the other side I've got a picture of it's a thermal image of a leaf, because I work on how plants cope with high temperatures. And the picture of the leaf is data. But I also find it quite beautiful. And so, I've always sort of battled with this idea that your data can be beautiful. And after a while, I just sort of relaxed and realised that actually having an emotional response as a scientist is quite okay. And in fact, as a teacher, I and my colleague Peter take students out into the bush for 2 weeks at a time. And we tell them about the landscape, we educate them, but we do also encourage an emotional response to the landscape, because I think that we are too disconnected from the landscape or from the natural world, and that as scientists that we have just as much reason to validate an emotional response to it and still be objective as scientists. So there was a bit of a battle for quite a while in me sort of sitting on two sides of the fence with science and art, but now I've relaxed and realised that actually as a scientist, as long as you still follow the rules of robust science, statistical and so forth, that encouraging an emotional response is in fact really important. And I think one of the problems that we have is that we're denying that emotional response.